Rain threaded the afternoon into silver strands as Miss Eliza Harrow dismissed her pupils with a patience that felt borrowed from prayer. The parish school stood at the edge of the village like a modest thought at the margin of a grand page, its bricks damp, its windows clouded by breath and chalk. Children hurried into the lane with slates tucked beneath their arms, laughter thinning into whispers when they noticed the cluster of parasols waiting beyond the gate. Eliza gathered the copybooks to her chest and stepped outside, unaware that the air had turned against her. The first whisper reached her as a tremor, not a sound. Mothers drew their sons aside with hands that trembled under lace gloves. A father removed his hat, then replaced it as though uncertain whether courtesy still applied. At the center of the gathering stood Lady Pembroke, jeweled and severe, her gaze sharpened into a blade. The lady's carriage idled nearby, horses stamping mud into the road as if impatient for the spectacle to begin. Eliza inclined her head, offering the civility she had always relied upon as shield and bread. "Miss Harrow," Lady Pembroke said, her voice sweetened to cruelty, "it has come to my attention that you presume too freely upon the minds of children who belong to families above your instruction." Eliza felt the sentence pass through her like winter through a cracked pane. "My lady, I teach them letters and sums, nothing more." "Ambition," the lady replied, "is a dangerous addition to the poor. You have encouraged ideas unsuited to their station, and worse, you have sought to place yourself where you do not belong." A murmur rippled outward. Eliza's gaze lowered to the wet road, where her shoes darkened by the minute. She understood, with a quiet horror, that the accusation required no evidence. It required only a voice gilded by rank. She attempted to answer, but each word dissolved before it could take shape. Children watched from the windows, palms pressed to the glass like pale flowers. A parent spoke, then another, each sentence adding a stone to the pile already pressing on her ribs. Someone mentioned impropriety, someone else insinuated manipulation. Eliza listened as though the charges concerned a stranger with her name. Her hands tightened around the copybooks until the paper bent. She had lived by dignity as others live by coin, and now dignity felt like a currency suddenly refused. Lady Pembroke lifted her chin. "You will vacate this position at once. Our children will not be subjected to your influence another day." Rain tapped steadily on parasols, punctuating the decree. Eliza bowed because she did not know what else to do. The motion steadied her spine if not her breath. She passed the key to the parish clerk without looking at him. The clerk accepted it with the sorrow of a man who could not afford courage. Then the lane fell abruptly silent. Heads turned toward the road's bend where a dark carriage approached with the measured authority of a verdict. Its crest, silver against black, flashed between the rain threads. Even Lady Pembroke's posture shifted, pride retreating into calculation. The horses slowed before the school gate, steam rising from their flanks like ghosts reluctant to depart. The door opened. A tall figure stepped down, hat brim shadowing a face known to every household and spoken of in lowered tones. His coat fell in disciplined lines, gloves immaculate despite the weather. He did not hurry. He did not greet. He regarded the scene with a composure that felt almost indecent in its calm. This was His Grace, Duke Alastair Ravensshire, widowed, wealthy, and as distant as the hills beyond the estate. Eliza sensed his presence before she dared look. When she did, their eyes met across the rain-dimmed space, and something unsettled moved between them like a question neither had prepared to ask. She expected rebuke or rescue or indifference. What she received was observation so intent it felt like touch. The Duke's gaze traveled from her bowed head to the copybooks crushed in her arms, then to the cluster of accusing faces and back to her again. No one spoke. The rain filled the silence with patient insistence. Lady Pembroke attempted a smile that faltered at its edges. "Your Grace, an unfortunate matter of discipline," she began, but the words thinned under his stillness. He inclined his head, not to her, but to Eliza. It was the smallest acknowledgement, almost a courtesy offered to a stranger at a crossing. Yet it rearranged the air. Eliza felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from shame now, but from the peculiar sensation of being seen rather than judged. She did not know what he understood, only that he understood something. Without comment he returned to the carriage. The door closed with a sound too soft to carry authority, yet the authority remained, hovering like the echo of a bell. The horses moved. Mud swallowed the wheels' impressions as though eager to erase evidence of interruption. Conversation resumed in cautious fragments, no longer as bold as before. Eliza walked home through streets that seemed narrower than yesterday. Windows held curious faces, doors closed before she passed. Her lodging welcomed her with the familiar scent of coal and starch, and she set the copybooks upon the table as if they were relics from a life already concluded. She removed her wet shawl and sat without lighting the lamp, letting the dimness settle over her thoughts like dusk over fields. Humiliation did not arrive as tears but as a hollowing, a quiet removal of the inner furniture that made her room livable. She considered the children's faces, the chalk dust on her sleeves, the careful pride she had taken in doing one small thing well. All of it seemed to have slipped through her fingers during a single rain-soaked hour. Outside, wheels passed on the street with indifferent rhythm. A knock sounded at her door. Firm. Unhurried. She opened it to find a servant in livery she recognized at once, though she had never stood so near. He bowed and extended a sealed envelope bearing a silver crest impressed into deep blue wax. "For Miss Harrow," he said, and departed before she could summon a question. The room felt suddenly smaller, as though the letter occupied more space than the table could grant. Eliza held it with both hands. The wax caught the candlelight she had finally lit, gleaming like a watchful eye. Rain continued its patient thread upon the roof while her pulse counted the seconds between breath and decision. She broke the seal, unfolded the thick paper, and began to read. The letter trembled once in Eliza's hands before she steadied it against the table, as though calming a frightened bird. The script was decisive, each stroke of ink confident without ornament. He did not waste words. He did not apologize. He did not explain. The message advanced with a plainness that felt almost indecent in its honesty. He required a loving mother for his sons, and she required shelter. If she would consider an arrangement mutually beneficial, a carriage would call for her at noon. She read the lines again, searching for mockery hidden between the spaces. None appeared. The proposal possessed a gravity that forbade laughter. It was not romance. It was not pity. It was a negotiation spoken in the language of necessity. Eliza placed the paper down and walked the length of her small room, then back again as though distance might offer clarity. The rain had lessened outside, leaving the world rinsed and undecided. Her pride rose first, wounded and sharp. Was she to be bartered like furniture between circumstances? Yet beneath pride lay a quieter truth. Her position was gone, her name unsettled, her savings meager. The village had already begun the gentle erasure reserved for the disgraced poor. Shelter was no small word. It was the difference between endurance and collapse. She closed her eyes and imagined the Duke's gaze in the rain, that strange attention unaccompanied by judgment. At noon precisely, wheels sounded below her window. Eliza had not realized she was waiting until her heart leaped to meet the noise. She dressed with care in the simplest gown she owned, brushed her hair until it obeyed, and folded the letter into her reticule as if it were both invitation and warning. When she stepped outside, neighbors pretended not to notice while noticing everything. The carriage bore the Ravensshire crest without ostentation, its black surface polished into a dark mirror of the sky. A footman opened the door with a courtesy that startled her. She entered, sitting upright upon the velvet seat, hands folded tightly in her lap. As the vehicle moved, the village slid past in cautious silence, windows blooming with faces that quickly withdrew. The road unfurled toward the estate like a ribbon pulled from a drawer too long neglected. Fields broadened. Stone walls grew more dignified. The gates of Ravensshire opened with a patient grandeur that suggested they had never known haste. Eliza felt herself cross an invisible threshold where her former life diminished to a rumor behind her. The house rose from the earth with the calm authority of something accustomed to being obeyed. Tall windows reflected the sky. Ivy climbed the walls in disciplined patterns. When the carriage halted, a steward awaited her at the steps, his expression respectful without curiosity. She was led through corridors where carpets muffled sound and portraits observed with inherited composure. She expected to be directed toward servants' quarters. Instead, she was shown into a sitting room warmed by a small fire and told that His Grace would join her shortly. The room's quiet felt different from her lodging's quiet. It was not born of absence but of abundance restrained. Eliza stood near the mantel, uncertain where to place her hands. The door opened, and the Duke entered without ceremony. In daylight, his presence seemed less shadowed yet no less formidable. He bowed slightly. "Miss Harrow, I thank you for coming." "I came to understand your grace," she replied, surprised at the steadiness of her voice. "As you should." He gestured for her to sit. "I will speak plainly. My sons require what I cannot give them. You require what this house can provide. I believe these needs may be reconciled." She searched his face for condescension and found only resolve. "And if I refuse? Then you will depart with my respect and a purse sufficient to secure your comfort elsewhere." His tone did not change. "I have no wish to coerce you. Before she could answer, the door opened again, and two boys hovered in the threshold like hesitant thoughts. The elder, perhaps 8, clutched a wooden horse. The younger hid half his face behind his brother's sleeve. Their eyes, solemn and watchful, settled on Eliza with a hunger she recognized at once, the longing to be met gently. "Come," the Duke said softly, and the word altered him. The boys approached with careful steps. Eliza knelt without thinking, lowering herself to their height. "Good afternoon," she said, offering a smile that felt like sunlight after rain. The younger boy reached out first, touching the fabric of her sleeve as if confirming she was real. The elder studied her with grave seriousness. "Do you read stories?" he asked. "I do," she answered. "And I know many by heart." Something fragile shifted in the room. The Duke watched without speaking, his gaze intent in a way that made Eliza forget her own uncertainty. The younger child moved closer, leaning against her shoulder with shy trust. She felt the small weight and understood, with startling clarity, the shape of the absence she had been invited to fill. Later, as she was shown the chamber prepared beside the nursery, servants passed with discreet glances that carried rumor ahead of explanation. Word traveled quickly through halls accustomed to hierarchy. She was not presented as staff, yet not declared anything else. Suspicion moved like a draft beneath doors. That evening she was summoned to dine. The table was long, the chairs many, though only a handful were occupied by household officers. The Duke entered last and took his place at the head. Conversation faltered into attentive silence. Eliza felt every eye measure the distance between her chair and his. He lifted his glass, not for a toast but for attention. "Miss Harrow shall remain at Ravensshire under my protection," he said, his voice calm as stone. "Her presence here is by my invitation and my intention." No one questioned him. No one dared. Yet the silence that followed carried the weight of 100 unspoken judgments. Eliza met his gaze across the table, and for the first time since the rain-soaked dismissal, she felt something within her straighten. Not pride, not relief, but the beginning of a different kind of endurance. When she returned to her chamber, a maid had laid a nightdress upon the bed and drawn the curtains against the dark. The house settled into sleep around her with the low murmur of distant footsteps. Eliza sat at the edge of the mattress and unfolded the Duke's letter once more. The words had not changed, but she had. She could no longer pretend the proposal was abstract. It had faces now, small and solemn, waiting beyond the wall. A knock came softly at her door. She opened it to find the elder boy standing barefoot in the corridor, wooden horse clutched in his hand. He looked up at her with a bravery that trembled. "May you sit with us until we fall asleep?" he asked. Eliza glanced down the hall where lamplight glowed faintly from the nursery. She nodded and followed him into the warm hush, unaware that in the shadowed doorway behind them, the Duke stood watching, his expression unreadable as he witnessed the first quiet threads of his daring proposal begin to bind. The library at Ravensshire had a silence that seemed measured in breaths, not seconds. Candles burned low in polished sconces, their flames flickering against the leather-bound tomes and gilded frames, casting shadows that danced with a deliberate grace. Rain pattered against the tall windows in gentle insistence, yet inside the air was warm and expectant. Eliza stood near the hearth, her fingers lightly grazing the spine of a book she had no intention of reading. She had learned over the days of her arrival that the house spoke in subtleties, in the hush of servants' steps, in the quiet gaze of portraits that seemed to appraise, in the measured tone of its master. He entered without ceremony, boots silent against the carpet, coat damp from the lingering drizzle. Duke Alastair Ravenshire's presence filled the room as a wave might fill a vessel, not violently but entirely. He removed his gloves, draping them over the arm of a chair, then stood near the hearth, his eyes catching the candlelight in a way that made shadows seem to bend toward him. For a moment neither spoke. The only sound was the rain and the occasional pop of the fire, as though the room itself held its breath. "Eliza," he began, his voice deliberate, carrying the same restraint that governed his movements, "you have been at Ravensshire now for some days. Have you found the arrangements tolerable?" She lifted her gaze to meet his, wary yet resolute. "They are sufficient, Your Grace. I am grateful for the comfort, though I cannot ignore the eyes that follow me, or the whispers that linger behind closed doors." He inclined his head slightly. "You speak with honesty and I value it. Society is quick to condemn what it does not understand. Yet in this house, you are under my observation, yes, but also my protection." The words were meant to reassure, yet Eliza felt the weight of them in her chest.
Protection could carry many meanings, and the line between shelter and ownership was narrow in a place like Ravensshire. She set her hands on the back of a chair and tried to steady the fluttering in her ribs. "I am not here to claim affection, Your Grace. Nor to solicit it. I am here because circumstance has left me few options." He stepped closer, closing the space between them without intruding. "And yet, circumstance has left you with more than mere survival, Miss Harrow. It has placed you where you are needed." His eyes softened briefly, betraying a subtle vulnerability beneath the stern exterior. "My sons have not spoken to anyone with true ease since their mother's passing. You have drawn their voices from silence. I would be dishonest if I claimed this was only convenience or duty." Eliza felt a tightening in her throat, the unexpected confession acting like wind against a fragile flame. She lowered her gaze, aware that the firelight painted her cheeks in warmth she could not wholly claim. I did not intend to," she faltered, her voice catching, but he did not allow the moment to vanish. "You did not intend, and yet you succeeded. That is often how courage presents itself, quietly, without fanfare." He moved to the window, gesturing to the garden beyond, its forms blurred by the steady rain. "I have observed you at the school before these walls, tending to children with patience that exceeds what I could have imagined for myself. It is a rare gift, Miss Harrow, and one I cannot ignore." Eliza lifted her eyes to the glass, tracing the garden with an absent-minded reverence. "It is a gift I offer freely, Your Grace, yet one that carries no claim beyond what necessity demands. I'm not accustomed to admiration of this sort. It unsettles me." He turned, his expression softening further, showing the shadow of a man who had long governed his life by control and duty, and who now, in her presence, felt the stirrings of something uncharted. "You may think it admiration, yet it is more than that. It is acknowledgement. The world has treated you unjustly, yet here within these walls, your worth is not measured by rumor or rank. My sons see it. I see it. And I hope in time you might see it as well." She felt the room constrict and expand simultaneously, as if the space between them carried both the weight of society's judgment and the possibility of reprieve. For a moment, the library became a sanctuary, not merely of wood and candlelight, but of recognition and quiet understanding. She dared to speak, her voice a mere tremor. "I have known only judgment for so long that kindness feels foreign, and yet, necessary." He nodded once, sharply, the motion like a blade smoothing the air. "Kindness is often mistaken for weakness. You have proven it is neither. Do you realize how rare it is to enter a home and find a child's trust given freely, without reservation, without fear? That is what you have done here, Miss Harrow. You have entered hearts that have been walled in grief, and you have been seen as a healer, not an intruder." The words sank deep, and Eliza pressed her palms against the edge of the table, grounding herself. "And yet I am aware of the scrutiny that surrounds me. The house is large and the eyes within it many. I cannot pretend ignorance of what is whispered, even when I am treated with courtesy." His gaze sharpened, yet softened, a paradox he wore naturally. "Let them whisper. The world has no authority here. Only necessity, only truth. I will not have my son's peace disturbed, nor yours diminished by idle talk. You are under my care, Miss Harrow, and if you doubt my intentions I will show you, if not with words then with action." A fire flickered between them, more than candlelight, more than warmth. It was the recognition of loneliness mirrored, of burdens shared, of trust extending across a space neither had yet measured fully. The first vulnerable line had been crossed, and neither could retreat without loss. Eliza felt herself drawn to the quiet fortitude behind his composed manner, the restrained passion that lay beneath his noble exterior. She understood, perhaps for the first time, that the offer of shelter was more than protection. It was an invitation into a life that had been bereft of hope, and that she, with no intention of conquest, had begun to illuminate. A sudden, soft noise interrupted them, a hesitant voice in the corridor. One of the boys had ventured close, peeking around the doorframe with wide, watchful eyes. He called softly, "Mama?" The word trembled in the air, fragile and uncertain, and yet it carried the weight of longing. Eliza's heart quivered, and she turned to the Duke, whose eyes reflected neither surprise nor judgment, but something quieter, more profound, acknowledgement of the fragile bridge now forming between them.
He stepped toward the door, silent as the night, and allowed her a moment to kneel and draw the boy into the warmth of her presence. His hand rested lightly on the doorknob, a sentinel poised but unobtrusive. She held the child against her shoulder, feeling the small pulse of his fear and hope, and whispered, "I am here. You are safe." The Duke watched, his expression a mixture of relief and wonder, the first tangible signs of an intention long restrained now made visible. Words, they both knew, were insufficient to capture the gravity of this connection, yet the room seemed to hum with understanding. Outside, the rain had lessened, leaving the garden glistening, yet it was the quiet within that was most luminous, most revealing. When the boy nestled against her, the other appeared, silent, bearing his own small offering, a wooden toy polished by fingers unaccustomed to gentleness. Eliza extended her hand, and he placed it in hers without hesitation. The gesture spoke more eloquently than any letter, any lecture, any promise. Trust, once broken by grief and absence, had begun to mend. The Duke finally spoke in a voice softer than before, nearly lost to the shadows between the shelves. "You see now, Miss Harrow, why I invited you here. It is not charity. It is necessity, yes, but necessity tempered by truth. My sons' hearts are not empty, they are waiting. And so are yours, though you may not yet realize it." Eliza lifted her eyes to meet his across the firelight. There was no command in his glance, only recognition, and she understood that the first unspoken barrier had fallen. Her hands rested on the boy, her pulse steadying as the warmth of her purpose filled her chest. In that library, amidst leather and candlelight and the faint hum of rain, she glimpsed the possibility of belonging, and the formidable challenge it carried. The moment held, suspended, before the world outside intruded once more, and she realized that to step fully into this home would require courage she had not yet claimed, yet already possessed. The grand ballroom of Ravensshire shone with a brilliance that seemed almost unnatural in its intensity. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations, their multifaceted lights scattering across polished marble and gilded panels, casting the guests in a spectrum of soft golds and silvers. The orchestra struck the first delicate chord of a waltz, its notes winding through the vast space with precision and elegance, as if each sound had been measured to heighten anticipation. The nobility had arrived in their finest attire, gowns shimmering like liquid jewels, waistcoats embroidered with threads of silver and copper, their eyes sharp with curiosity, their lips curved in polite, assessing smiles. Eliza stood at the edge of the room, her posture poised, her gown of deep sapphire flowing around her in gentle ripples. Every movement, every breath was watched, dissected, evaluated by those who had already whispered about her presence for days. She felt the weight of their judgment as though it pressed on her shoulders in invisible hands. A gentle quiver in her stomach reminded her that while she had mastered the art of calm, this world of whispered speculation, glitter, and expectation had the power to unearth every fragile doubt she had buried. And yet she did not falter. Duke Alastair Ravensshire appeared at the far end of the room, a figure of measured authority, the embodiment of restraint and composure. He moved through the crowd with purpose, each step deliberate, his eyes scanning, appraising, protective. When he reached her side, the air between them seemed to bend slightly, as though the space itself recognized the gravity of the moment. He extended his hand, not as a gesture of casual civility, but as an assertion of connection, of protection, and of claim. Eliza placed her gloved hand in his, feeling the solid weight of it, a grounding force against the tide of eyes and whispers. "You will not allow them to unsettle you," he murmured, just enough for her to hear over the delicate swell of the music. His voice was not commanding, but it carried the same quiet authority that had drawn the boys to her in the nursery. "Your place here is not dependent on their approval, but on your courage and grace." "I will not falter," she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of awareness swirling through her. In truth, she had faltered many times in her life, yet never had she faced such scrutiny without the anchor of his presence. It was a strange kind of comfort, both protective and intimidating, like standing in sunlight filtered through stained glass, brilliant yet confining. The first whisper reached her almost immediately, a hiss disguised as casual conversation. "Do you see her?" a lady's voice asked. "A governess among the Ravensshires. How curious. One wonders what business she has here." Eyes followed her as she moved through the room, polite bows given, polite smiles returned. Each step required careful precision, a choreography she had not rehearsed, yet executed by instinct. She felt the tension in the air, the way society's judgment tried to press against her, and she met it with an unexpected steadiness, fueled by the memory of the children's trust, the warmth of the library fire, the quiet affirmation of the Duke's gaze. The orchestra's melody rose and the Duke offered his arm. She took it, a gesture that immediately transformed perception. The murmurs around them shifted, curiosity sharpening into shock. In that moment he was not merely a nobleman performing social obligation. He was a protector, a champion, a man unafraid to defy convention. Eliza felt the subtle shift in herself, fear and doubt giving way to resolve, hesitation bending into quiet pride. They moved across the ballroom floor, their pace steady, unhurried, as though the room itself had slowed to accommodate them. The Duke's hand on hers was firm yet gentle, an assertion of presence without domination. She dared a glance at him, and in his eyes she saw recognition, acknowledgement, and an unspoken promise that no whisper, no judgment, could diminish what they were creating together. The dance was more than movement, it was a declaration. Each step, each turn, communicated something society could not contain: the validation of her worth, the recognition of her courage, and the undeniable bond forming between them. A sharp laugh cut through the melody. Lady Pembroke, jeweled and severe, had arrived late, her eyes narrowing as they found Eliza. "How remarkable," she said, her voice carrying to the surrounding guests, "that a teacher should find herself at the side of the Duke. Truly, unprecedented." Her tone was laden with insinuation, yet she could not mask the flicker of disbelief that betrayed curiosity. Eliza met the gaze of the lady with calm, her chin raised, her eyes steady. "Circumstance," she said softly, "does not always follow expectation. And character need not be measured by station." The words were deliberate, courteous, yet infused with quiet power. A hush fell among the listeners. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that she was not a woman to be dismissed or whispered about lightly. The Duke's response was measured but resonant, carried across the ballroom in a way that left no room for doubt. "Miss Harrow's presence here is not a matter of convenience, nor of mere charity. It is a matter of discernment, trust, and necessity. She is chosen not for her station, but for her integrity, her courage, and the grace she has shown to those most deserving." His declaration rippled through the assembly. Gasps, stifled murmurs, and astonished expressions spread like wildfire. The scandal they had anticipated, the gossip, the disbelief, was overtaken by awe and reluctant admiration. Eliza felt a flush of warmth, not of vanity but of affirmation. The room had shifted. The scale of judgment that had once pressed upon her felt lighter, now counterbalanced by the strength of his words and the sincerity in his gaze. The boy's trust, the children who had first called her Mama, in trembling voices, had carried her thus far. Now, under the chandeliers and the scrutiny of society, her place was recognized, defended, and claimed. They continued to dance, the melody rising and falling like the tides of their shared understanding. Guests moved aside, giving them space not merely for the waltz, but for the statement it represented. Every eye in the room traced their steps, measuring, evaluating, yet unable to deny the authenticity radiating from the pair. The Duke's hand at her back was steady, anchoring, and she began to sense the delicate interplay of restraint and longing that had been present from the first day she entered Ravensshire. At a pivotal turn, he bent slightly, his lips near her ear, and spoke with the intimacy of someone revealing a secret meant for no one else. "This was never charity, Eliza. Never obligation. It was always you." The words carried weight beyond sound, vibrating through her chest and grounding the storm of uncertainty she had carried since her dismissal. She had known necessity, she had understood duty, yet never had she encountered a declaration so personal, so unassailable, that it reshaped the narrative of her life in a single breath. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a quiet smile, one that did not hide behind propriety or caution, but spoke of acknowledgement, of understanding, of tentative triumph. Around them, the orchestra swelled, and the room, though still filled with observers, became a space of intimacy, a theater in which their bond had taken center stage. The tension that had built in whispered corners, in observing eyes, and in cautious hearts was released, transformed into validation and recognition. The dance drew to a slow close, and they paused, faces near, breaths mingling, and yet no words were necessary to convey the shared understanding. Eliza's hand remained in his, not as a gesture of submission, but of mutual commitment to a path forged through courage, trust, and vulnerability. She sensed, in the steady beat of the orchestra's fading notes, that the world outside might still resist, yet within this moment they had claimed their own truth. A hush followed, not of judgment but of anticipation. Lady Pembroke's lips parted, eyes widening with reluctant respect. Others exchanged glances, some of curiosity, some of astonishment, yet the room had shifted, and the narrative had been set in motion. Eliza, standing beneath the glow of chandeliers, the warmth of the Duke's hand, and the acknowledgement of those around her, felt the tremor of possibility. The precarious balance of societal expectation, personal desire, and emerging love had tilted toward affirmation. As she stepped back, the boys' laughter rang faintly from the corridor, carried through an open door, a reminder of the stakes beyond the ballroom. The Duke's gaze met hers once more, steady and unwavering. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice low yet resolute. "And yet it is ours." Eliza nodded, the weight of the evening settling around her not as burden but as mantle. In the swirl of silk, crystal, and whispered astonishment, she understood the truth of the journey she had embarked upon, that dignity, courage, and trust could reshape not merely a home, but the hearts within it. And as they moved together toward the doorway, the quiet promise lingered, suspended in the candlelight, waiting for the next step, an affirmation that the bond forged in whispers, observation, and courage would endure beyond judgment, scandal, and expectation, into the life they were destined to share. The morning air at Ravenshire carried a clarity reserved for moments of reckoning. Sunlight poured through tall windows, illuminating the gardens with the brilliance of polished emeralds. Dew clung to the hedges like suspended diamonds, and the distant birdsong seemed unusually deliberate, punctuating the hush of anticipation that had settled over the estate. Inside, the halls were silent save for the soft rustle of silk and the measured footfalls of servants who moved with quiet efficiency, as if even the walls themselves awaited the day's revelation. Eliza stood in her chamber, hands folded over the fabric of her gown, heart steady despite the thrill of unease that coiled like spring beneath her ribs. Today, the arrangements that had begun with necessity and subtle trust would find their test in public acknowledgement. The boys had awoken early, their excitement palpable even through the thick walls. They dressed themselves in careful attire, small gloves on tiny hands, polished shoes reflecting the faint glimmer of dawn. Each glance from their eager eyes reminded Eliza of the lives intertwined with hers, lives she had been invited to shape and protect, and she felt the weight and warmth of responsibility pressing equally upon her shoulders. A knock at the door heralded the first of many challenges. The Duke entered with his customary composure, coat impeccably tailored, hat removed, and gaze steady upon her. "Shall we?" he asked, the simplicity of the question betraying none of the gravity that lingered between them. His presence was at once familiar and commanding, a balance she had grown to rely upon yet never fully take for granted. The carriage awaited, polished and ready, as the boys clambered inside with laughter muffled by polite restraint. Eliza followed, seatbelt by the Duke's quiet presence at her side, their hands brushing once in a fleeting confirmation of solidarity. The journey toward the village and the parish school was quiet, punctuated only by the rhythmic clip of horses' hooves on stone, each step echoing with anticipation. Eliza's thoughts wandered to the moment that would define not only her place within the household but the permanence of her claim upon the children's hearts and, inevitably, the Duke's. Upon arrival, the villagers had gathered in muted expectation. Mothers held hands over mouths, children peeked from behind their fathers, and whispers fluttered through the air like fragile birds uncertain of flight. Lady Pembroke had arrived as well, her presence a sharp contrast to the soft morning sun, jeweled and rigid with her judgment already apparent. Her eyes found Eliza with the disdain of one who believes herself the arbiter of propriety, yet today her scrutiny would meet defiance measured not in arrogance, but in quiet certainty. The Duke descended first, offering greetings with a calm authority that silenced speculation before it could solidify. He turned toward Eliza, extending his hand as he had in the ballroom, but now with the weight of purpose unmistakable. "Miss Harrow," he said, his tone resonant and unyielding, "you have demonstrated courage, integrity, and patience beyond the measure of circumstance. The choice before us today is not merely social, it is necessary, and I trust your judgment as I trust my own." Eliza took his hand, the touch a tether to resolve she had cultivated through weeks of observation, reflection, and tentative trust. "Your Grace," she said, voice steady though her pulse raced, "I am aware that today the eyes of many will judge us before understanding. Yet I have no fear in walking this path, provided the children are safe, and you remain truthful to your own convictions." The Duke inclined his head, a brief smile softening the stern lines of his face. "Truth shall guide us and courage shall protect us." His gaze swept over the assembled villagers, the weight of expectation and judgment pressing down in waves, and he turned back to her. "Are you ready?" Eliza inhaled, feeling the morning light warm her resolve. "I am," she replied. The children emerged, small hands entwined with hers, faces radiant with the anticipation of acknowledgement and the validation of their bond. The villagers observed with bated breath as the Duke approached, the silence extending like a taut ribbon between every soul present. He knelt before the children, a gesture both protective and ceremonial, and spoke with deliberate clarity. These young souls, he said, his voice carrying over the courtyard, have known loss, longing, and the absence of care. Today, they are to be entrusted to the guidance, love, and protection of one whose heart has proven itself steadfast, gentle, and true. Eliza's eyes met his across the children, and she felt the fragile bridge of trust they had constructed solidify beneath the weight of public acknowledgement. She knelt beside the boys, hands resting upon their small shoulders, and whispered, "You are cherished, and I will not falter in keeping you safe." A murmur rose among the villagers, curiosity mingling with reluctant admiration. Lady Pembroke's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze a mixture of surprise and disapproval, yet she did not interrupt. For once, the judgment of society bowed beneath the declaration of truth, measured not by title or wealth, but by character and courage. The Duke rose, stepping closer to Eliza, and offered a hand that was both invitation and assurance. "Miss Harrow," he said softly, yet with a resonance that carried through the courtyard, "this household, these children, and my trust are yours. Shall you accept not merely the role of protector, but the position of family within Ravensshire?" Eliza's breath caught, the gravity of the moment pressing upon her in a way that sharpened every sensation. The weight of expectation, responsibility, and potential joy converged, and she knew that her choice would define not only her own life but the lives intertwined with hers. She extended her hand, fingers brushing the Duke's with deliberate intent. "I accept," she said, voice clear and unwavering, "with every measure of my heart." A quiet cheer rose from the children, their laughter ringing like bells, unrestrained and jubilant. The villagers observed in stunned silence, unable to deny the authenticity and beauty of the moment unfolding before them. Lady Pembroke's eyes flickered with attention that suggested recognition, begrudging perhaps, yet undeniable. The bond formed in courage, compassion, and integrity could not be undone by scandal or expectation. The Duke closed the small distance between them, lowering his gaze to hers with the intimacy of a shared understanding, a pact sealed in the witness of those who mattered most. "Then it is settled," he said, his voice carrying both authority and tenderness. "You are ours as we are yours in trust, care, and the unspoken acknowledgement of what has been long needed." Eliza felt the world settle around her, the tension melting into a warmth that radiated through her chest. The fear that had shadowed her since the parish school's dismissal now seemed distant, an echo of a life left behind. Here, amidst sunlight, dew, and the chorus of small voices, she understood the enormity of the journey undertaken, that dignity, love, and courage had forged a home where once there had been only uncertainty. The children clung to her hands, small fingers curling in trust, and she pressed her cheek to the elder boy's crown, inhaling the faint scent of morning and possibility. The Duke's presence at her side was steady, unspoken support rendered in the simple weight of his hand near hers. Around them, the courtyard breathed with a quiet reverence, as if even the air acknowledged the magnitude of the pledge made. A carriage appeared at the far gate, signaling the arrival of a messenger with news from distant relatives, yet even this intrusion could not break the delicate equilibrium established. Eliza, standing between the past and the life now unfolding, recognized the strength she had discovered within herself. The Duke's eyes met hers once more, conveying the silent understanding that the bond forged here would withstand scrutiny, adversity, and time. And then, as the sun broke fully through lingering clouds, casting a brilliance across the estate and glinting in the children's eyes, the Duke spoke one final phrase, low yet firm, carrying the resonance of promise and possession. "Welcome home, Eliza. This is your place, your family, and your future." The courtyard seemed to hold its breath in acknowledgement, the moment crystallized in sunlight and shadow, laughter and whispered astonishment. Eliza's heart swelled with the gravity and grace of what had been claimed, the extraordinary ordinary, love formed not in fleeting sentiment, but in courage, trust, and the unwavering choice to protect and be present. The day shimmered with possibility, and as she took a deep breath and met the gaze of the man who had invited her into both family and future, she understood that this home, these children, and this man were hers to cherish, and that every challenge yet to come would be met with the strength they had forged together. And in the quiet, the gentle sway of the estate, the soft rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of the boys, the promise of what would come lingered, radiant and unbroken, like sunlight held in glass.